The divorce papers arrived on the same day I lost my research grant. I sat in my empty apartment, half the furniture gone along with Rebecca and our 7-year marriage, staring at 2 pieces of paper that represented the complete collapse of my life. The first, stamped with the university seal, informed me that my deep-sea research program was being indefinitely suspended due to budget constraints. The second, bearing my lawyer's letterhead, detailed the final settlement, alimony payments that would consume 70% of my remaining income for the next 5 years. Dr. Marcus Chen, once a respected oceanographer at UC San Diego, now a 42-year-old man facing bankruptcy and professional extinction. I was 3 weeks behind on rent and living on instant ramen when the call came. Dr. Chen, this is Dr. Catherine Webb from the Pacific Deep Sea Research Consortium. The voice was crisp, professional, with an undertone I couldn't quite identify. We have an urgent position that might interest you, very urgent. I'm listening, I said, though I'd never heard of the organization. We need someone with your expertise in abyssal zone ecosystems. The position is remote, very remote, but the compensation is substantial. $200,000 for a 6-month contract, plus hazard pay. My breath caught. $200,000 would solve everything. The debt, the alimony, the crushing weight of financial ruin that had been suffocating me for months. What's the catch? I asked. There was always a catch with offers like this. The work is conducted at extreme depth, 11,000 meters to be precise. In the Mariana Trench, you'd be stationed at our research facility, Benthos 7, for the full duration. No surface leave, 11,000 meters. Deeper than any human had a right to be. Deeper than most people could psychologically handle. But the money... I'll take it, I said before she could continue. Dr. Chen, I haven't finished explaining the... I'll take it, I repeated. When do I start? 3 days later, I was on a military transport flight to Guam. My entire life reduced to 2 duffel bags and a growing sense that I'd made either the best or worst decision of my life. The descent to Benthos 7 took 4 hours in a specialized, deep submersible that felt more like a coffin than a vehicle. As we dropped through the ocean layers, past the sunlight zone, past the twilight zone, past the midnight zone, and finally into the abyssal depths where no natural light had ever penetrated, I began to understand what I'd signed up for. The pilot, a gruff man named Morrison who spoke in grunts, handed me a laminated card as we passed the 10,000-meter mark. Station protocols, he said. Memorize them, follow them, no exceptions. I read the card by the submersible's dim interior lighting. Benthos 7 station protocols. Mandatory compliance. 1. Never look directly through observation windows between 0200–0400 hours. If you must be in observation areas during this time, keep blinds closed and lights on. 2. Do not respond to any sounds originating from outside the station hull, regardless of pattern or apparent urgency. Report all external sounds to supervision immediately. 3. Laboratory lighting must remain on at all times. If lights fail, evacuate the area and notify maintenance. Do not remain in darkened laboratory spaces. 4. All pressure suit inspections must be conducted in pairs. Never inspect or maintain life support equipment alone. 5. Communication with surface vessels follows strict schedules. Unauthorized transmissions are prohibited and will result in immediate termination. I looked up at Morrison. What kind of research station needs rules like these? He glanced back at me, his weathered face grim. The kind where people want to stay alive, Doc. The rest of the descent passed in silence, the weight of 11,000 meters of ocean pressing down on us like the judgment of some ancient god. When we finally reached Benthos 7, my first view of the station through the porthole made my stomach clench. It looked like a metallic spider crouched on the abyssal plain, its modular sections connected by reinforced tunnels that seemed impossibly fragile against the crushing darkness. Emergency lights blinked along its hull like dying stars, and the whole structure swayed slightly in the deep ocean currents. This would be my home for the next 6 months, a tiny bubble of life in the most hostile environment on Earth. Dr. Kowalski met me at the airlock, a tall, gaunt man in his 50s with prematurely white hair and eyes that seemed to look through me rather than at me. He wore the standard station jumpsuit, but something about the way he carried himself suggested military background. "Dr. Chen," he said, extending a hand that felt cold even through my gloves. "Welcome to Benthos 7. I trust Morrison briefed you on the protocols." "He gave me the card," I said, patting my pocket. "Though I have to ask—" "Questions can wait," Kowalski interrupted smoothly. "Let's get you settled first. The station takes some adjustment, and we have work to begin immediately." He led me through a cramped corridor lined with pipes, gauges, and warning signs in multiple languages. The air smelled of recycled oxygen, industrial lubricants, and something else. Something faintly organic and unpleasant that I couldn't identify. "Your quarters," he said, stopping at a door marked Chen M. 12 hours to acclimate, then we begin orientation. Dinner is at 1800 hours in the common area. Try to rest. The pressure changes can affect sleep patterns until your body adjusts. As he turned to leave, I caught his arm. "Dr. Kowalski, what exactly am I researching here?" The job posting was vague about specifics. He paused, his back still turned to me. "Abyssal ecosystem analysis, Dr. Chen. Deep-sea fauna cataloging. Standard oceanographic research. At 11,000 meters, there's barely any life at this depth, certainly nothing that would require a 6-month study with these kinds of protocols." When he turned back to face me, his expression was unreadable. "Dr. Chen, you took this position because you needed it. We offered it because we needed someone with your background and your particular circumstances. I suggest we both focus on fulfilling our respective obligations without unnecessary complications." The dismissal was clear, but something in his tone made my skin crawl. As he walked away, his footsteps echoing in the narrow corridor, I realized that my desperation had led me into something far more complex than a simple research assignment. I entered my quarters, a space barely larger than a closet containing a narrow bunk, a small desk, and a porthole that looked out into the absolute blackness of the deep ocean. As I unpacked my few belongings, I kept glancing at that window, imagining the crushing weight of water beyond the reinforced glass. 11,000 meters down. No way up except through the grace of others. No way out except through completion of a contract whose true nature I was already beginning to suspect I didn't understand. I pulled out the protocol card again and read it more carefully. Each rule seemed designed to protect against specific threats, but what kind of threats existed at the bottom of the ocean that required such precise behavioral modifications? As I lay on the narrow bunk, trying to process my situation, I heard something that made my blood run cold. A rhythmic tapping sound coming from somewhere outside the station hull. 3 short taps, pause, 2 long taps, pause, 3 short taps, SOS. I started to get up, instinctively moving toward the sound, when I remembered protocol number 2. Do not respond to any sounds originating from outside the station hull. The tapping continued for exactly 3 minutes, then stopped. In the silence that followed, I understood that whatever I'd gotten myself into, it was far more dangerous than financial ruin could ever be. But by then, of course, it was far too late to change my mind. The descent into hell, I realized, isn't always a fall. Sometimes it's a job you take because you have no other choice. I woke to the sound of the station's life support systems humming their mechanical lullaby. Air recyclers, water processors, and pressure regulators working in constant harmony to keep us alive in this metal bubble 11 kilometers beneath the surface. My watch read Yo 6:30 hours, and pale artificial light was already filtering through the corridor outside my quarters. The common area served as kitchen, dining room, and social hub, a cramped space with mismatched furniture that had clearly seen better days. 3 people sat around a scarred metal table, and they looked up as I entered with the kind of measured attention that suggested they'd been discussing me. "Our new arrival," said a woman with short auburn hair and dark circles under her eyes. She stood and extended her hand. "Sarah Mitchell, marine biologist. Sorry we didn't get properly introduced yesterday. Kowalski likes to handle new arrivals personally." Her handshake was firm but brief, and I noticed she kept glancing toward the corridor as if expecting someone to appear. "Petrov," grunted the second person, a stocky man with Slavic features and arms covered in old tattoos. He didn't stand, just nodded curtly from behind a steaming mug. "Engineer, I keep this tin can from imploding. The third person was older, maybe 60, with silver hair and the kind of deep tan that spoke of years spent on research vessels under open sky. "Dr. Harrison Webb," he said, rising with obvious authority. "Senior researcher. I coordinate our data collection and maintain liaison with surface operations." "Marcus Chen," I replied, taking the empty chair, "though I assume you already know that." Sarah poured coffee from a thermal carafe, her movements quick and nervous. "Kowalski briefed us on your background. Abyssal Zone Specialist, right? UCLA?" "UC San Diego," I corrected. "Was, anyway. Budget cuts." "Ah," Webb nodded knowingly. "The perpetual curse of marine research. Universities don't understand that you can't study the deep ocean from a classroom." I sipped the coffee, surprisingly good for a space that recycled everything, and tried to read the room. There was an undercurrent of tension I couldn't identify, like actors performing a script, while thinking about something else entirely. "So, what exactly are we studying down here?" I asked. The job posting mentioned abyssal ecosystem analysis, but at this depth. "Thermal vent communities," Sarah said quickly, too quickly. "There's a previously unknown vent field about 2 kilometers northeast. We're cataloging chemosynthetic organisms." Petrov snorted into his coffee. "Cataloging," he muttered in heavily accented English. Webb shot him a sharp look. "What Petrov means is that we're also monitoring seismic activity. The vent field generates interesting geological data." I nodded, though something felt off. Thermal vent research was valuable, but it didn't require a facility this sophisticated or protocols as specific as those I'd memorized. Before I could press further, Kowalski appeared in the doorway. "Doctor, Chen, if you're finished with breakfast, I'll show you to your workstation." The laboratory section of Benthos 7 was impressive. Banks of computers, specimen analysis equipment, and monitoring stations that would have made my old university department jealous. Kowalski led me to a workstation equipped with 3 high-resolution monitors and input terminals for various scanning devices. "Your primary task," he said, "is to analyze and catalog any biological samples brought back by our collection teams. Standard taxonomy, behavioral analysis, biochemical composition, the usual protocols for unknown species." "Unknown species?" That got my attention. "You're finding new organisms?" "The deep ocean is full of surprises, Dr. Chen. We've collected several specimens that don't match existing taxonomic classifications. Your expertise will help us understand what we're dealing with." He handed me a tablet containing work schedules and procedures. "Collection teams operate on rotating schedules. Surface communication windows are at 800, 1400, and 2000 hours daily. Under no circumstances should you attempt to use the radio outside these windows." "Why not?" Kowalski's expression didn't change. "Station protocols, Dr. Chen. I believe you received them during descent." After he left, I spent the morning familiarizing myself with the equipment and reviewing existing data files. What I found was puzzling. Dozens of specimens, many photographed but not physically collected, showing characteristics that seemed to defy conventional understanding of deep-sea biology. Organisms that appeared to exhibit bioluminescence patterns too complex for simple communication, tissue samples with unusual cellular structures, and most intriguing, several specimens that seemed to show signs of artificial modification or tool use. Fascinating stuff, isn't it? I turned to find Webb watching me from the laboratory entrance. "These images," I said, gesturing at the screen. "Some of these organisms appear to show technological integration. Are these natural adaptations, or—" "That's what we're trying to determine," Webb said, moving closer. "The deep ocean has been largely unexplored at these depths. We're discovering that life finds ways to exist and even thrive in conditions we previously thought impossible. But this one," I pointed to an image of what looked like a cephalopod with metallic appendages, "appears to have artificial components integrated into its nervous system." Webb studied the image. "Natural biomineralization can create structures that appear artificial. Many deep-sea creatures incorporate metals into their biology, iron in radula teeth, copper in blood proteins. What you're seeing might be an extreme example of that process." His explanation was plausible, but something in his tone suggested he didn't entirely believe it himself. The rest of the day passed quietly as I processed samples and entered data. The work was engaging enough, but I found myself constantly aware of the station's sounds, the hum of machinery, the occasional groan of metal under pressure, and underneath it all, a subtle vibration that seemed to come from the ocean floor itself. Around 1500 hours, I noticed Sarah pass by the laboratory entrance 3 times without entering, each time glancing inside as if checking on something. When I looked up from my work, she'd quickly look away and continue down the corridor. "Is there something you need?" I finally called out during her 4th pass. She stopped, hesitating. "No, I don't usually see anyone working in the lab during afternoon shift." "Why not? Most of us prefer to do laboratory work during morning hours. Better lighting," she said, though the laboratory lighting was completely artificial and constant. "Dr. Mitchell, Sarah, is everything okay? You seem nervous." She glanced around the corridor, then stepped into the laboratory. "It's probably nothing. Just, we've had some equipment malfunctions lately. Sensors picking up false readings, that sort of thing. Some of us think the lab equipment works better during certain hours." "What kind of false readings?" "Movement sensors, mostly. They sometimes detect motion in areas where no one is present. Kowalski says it's electromagnetic interference from the thermal vents, but..." She trailed off. "But you don't think so?" Sarah moved closer, lowering her voice. 3 months ago, we had a full team, 8 people. Now there are 4 of us, plus you. The others were transferred to different projects officially." "Officially?" Before she could respond, Petrov appeared in the doorway. "Sarah, Webb wants to see you in communications." She straightened immediately, her nervous demeanor returning. "Of course. Marcus, remember what I said about equipment schedules. It's important." After they left, I continued working, but Sarah's words echoed in my mind. 8 people reduced to 4. Equipment that worked better during certain hours. False readings detecting motion where none should exist. I checked the time. 16:47 hours. The laboratory would be empty soon as the evening shift began. Following Sarah's implied advice, I began shutting down my workstation, but as I reached for the power switch on the primary monitor, something on the screen caught my eye. A live feed from one of the external cameras showed the abyssal plain surrounding the station. Nothing unusual, just the endless darkness of the deep ocean floor. But as I watched, something moved across the edge of the frame. Something large, moving with purpose rather than drifting with the current. I enhanced the image and adjusted the contrast, but whatever it was had moved out of camera range. I checked the timestamp, 16:51 hours. I switched to other external cameras, scanning the feeds methodically. There, camera 7 focused on the station's northeastern section, a shape that didn't belong to the natural topography, something that seemed to pulse with its own faint bioluminescence. As I watched, it moved again, and for just a moment I could swear I saw what looked like deliberate manipulation of some object near the station's hull. I grabbed the intercom handset to report the sighting, then remembered protocol number 2. Do not respond to any sounds originating from outside the station hull, regardless of pattern or apparent urgency. Report all external sounds to supervision immediately. This wasn't a sound, but the spirit of the protocol seemed clear. External activity should be reported. I was reaching for the phone to call Kowalski when the laboratory lights flickered. For a split second, the room plunged into darkness, and in that moment of black, I heard something that made my heart stop. A rhythmic tapping on the hull, coming from the direction of camera 7. 3 short, 2 long, 3 short. The lights came back on immediately and the tapping stopped. I stood frozen, hand still reaching for the phone, understanding with crystal clarity that I had just witnessed something that the station protocols were specifically designed to address. Whatever was outside Benthos 7, it wasn't just deep-sea fauna following natural behavioral patterns. It was intelligent, deliberate, and it knew we were here. And based on Sarah's cryptic warnings and the fact that our team had been reduced by half, it had been trying to communicate for some time. I didn't sleep well my first night at Benthos 7. The station's sounds were alien to me. Creaks and groans that spoke of immense pressure, the constant hum of life support systems, and underneath it all, that subtle vibration I'd noticed during the day. Every time I started to drift off, I'd jolt awake, convinced I'd heard something that didn't belong. At 01:47 hours, I gave up trying to sleep and decided to review more specimen data. The corridors were dimly lit by emergency lighting, casting long shadows that seemed to move with the station's subtle sway. My footsteps echoed hollowly as I made my way toward the laboratory section. I was halfway there when I heard it, a soft tapping coming from somewhere ahead of me. I froze, instantly alert. The sound was rhythmic, deliberate, and it was coming from the direction of the observation deck, the area where Protocol 1 specifically warned against looking through windows between 0200 and 0400 hours. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, pause, tap, 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 SOS. The same pattern I'd heard my first day, the same pattern from the external camera feed, but this time it was louder, more insistent, and it seemed to be coming from multiple points along the hull. I checked my watch, 0152 hours. Well within the prohibited time frame. Every rational part of my brain screamed at me to return to my quarters, to follow the protocols I'd been given, but my scientific curiosity, the same drive that had led me into deep-sea research in the first place, pulled me forward. I needed to understand what was making that sound. The observation deck was a circular chamber with reinforced windows offering a panoramic view of the abyssal plain. During normal hours, it was breathtaking, a vista of endless darkness punctuated by the station's external lights. Now the blinds were drawn tight, and only the emergency lighting provided illumination. The tapping grew louder as I approached, and I could distinguish at least 3 different sources, one directly ahead, one to my left, and one that seemed to be coming from below. The sound resonated through the hull with a metallic quality that suggested whatever was making it had considerable strength. I stood before the main observation window, my hand hovering over the blind controls. Protocol 1 was explicit. Never look directly through observation windows between 0200 and 0400 hours. But the tapping was so insistent, so purposeful, that every instinct told me something was trying to communicate. The sound suddenly stopped. In the absolute silence that followed, I became aware of my own breathing, the rapid beating of my heart, and a new sound, soft footsteps coming down the corridor behind me. Dr. Chen. I spun around to find Sarah standing in the doorway, but this wasn't the nervous, fidgety Sarah I'd met at breakfast. This Sarah was pale, her eyes wide with what looked like terror, and she was trembling. "You heard it too," she whispered. "The tapping?" "Yes. Don't." She held up a shaking hand. "Don't look through the windows. Whatever you do, don't look." "Sarah, what's out there?" She glanced at the covered windows, as if they might suddenly become transparent. "They came back early," she said, more to herself than to me. "They're not supposed to come back for another 2 weeks." "Who came back, Sarah? You're not making sense." She looked at me then, and I saw something in her eyes that chilled me more than the tapping had. Recognition. She knew exactly what was outside those windows. "The collection team," she said slowly. "They went out 4 days ago to gather specimens from the thermal vent field. They weren't supposed to return until next week, but..." She gestured helplessly toward the windows. "Then why don't we just let them in? Open the airlock." Sarah's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Because they're not in a submersible, Dr. Chen. They're outside, in the water, at 11,000 meters of pressure, without suits." The implications of what she was saying hit me like a physical blow. No human could survive at this depth without protection. The pressure alone would crush a person instantly. Whatever was outside tapping on our hull, it wasn't, couldn't be, human. "But you said they came back early," I managed. "I said they came back. I didn't say they came back human." The tapping resumed, more urgent now, and I could hear what sounded like movement along the hull, multiple sources creating a cacophony of metallic percussion. Sarah grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "We need to leave, now, before they realize we're here." "Sarah, wait!" A new sound cut through the tapping, a voice muffled by water and metal but unmistakably human, calling from outside the station. Sarah, please, we need help, the pressure." "Something's wrong with the pressure." Sarah's grip on my arm tightened to the point of pain. "That's Dr. Hoffman," she whispered. "He was the team leader. But Marcus, you have to understand, Hoffman died 3 months ago." The voice came again, clearer now, and with it came other voices, all calling out in distress, all asking for help, all speaking with the clarity of people breathing air rather than drowning in the crushing depths of the abyssal zone. "Sarah, the protocols, don't answer, don't respond. Jenny, are you in there? Please, we're hurt, we need medical attention." Sarah was shaking violently now. "That's Jenny Morrison. She was on the original team. She was..." Sarah's voice broke. "She was my research partner. But she's been gone for 4 months." The voices multiplied. 5, 6, 7 different people, all calling out in desperation, all claiming to need help, all speaking from a place where human speech should be impossible. And underneath their words, I could hear something else. A subtle wrongness in their tone, as if they were remembering how to speak rather than speaking naturally. I looked around the observation deck and noticed something that made my blood run cold. There were scratches on the walls, deep gouges in the metal that looked like claw marks. They were concentrated around the window frames, as if something had been trying to get inside. "Sarah, how long has this been happening?" "Since the first collection team didn't come back," she said, her voice barely audible. "6 months ago. Every few weeks they return. They call out to us, they tap on the hull, they try to get our attention. But they're different now, changed." The voices outside grew more insistent, more desperate, and I began to notice patterns in their speech, repetitive phrases, identical intonations, as if they were playing recordings rather than speaking spontaneously. "We need to get back to the others," Sarah said. "Webb needs to know they're back early. He needs to adjust the schedules." "What schedules?" "The collection schedules, the communication windows. Everything has to be coordinated when they're active." As if summoned by her words, Webb appeared in the corridor behind us, fully dressed despite the early hour. He didn't seem surprised to find us there. "How many?" he asked Sarah without preamble. "At least 7 voices. Maybe more. They're using the same identities as last time." Webb nodded grimly. "Standard protocol then. No one goes near the observation decks or external laboratories until they leave. Petrov's already sealed the lower sections." "Doctor." "Webb," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "What exactly is happening here?" He looked at me with the expression of someone delivering a terminal diagnosis. "Dr. Chen, what you're witnessing is what we call a contact event. The entities outside are attempting to establish communication using familiar forms." "Entities?" "The previous collection teams encountered something at the thermal vent site, something that learned from them. These manifestations appear periodically, using the voices and memories of our former colleagues to try to gain entry to the station." The voices outside suddenly stopped, leaving us in a silence so complete it felt oppressive. Webb checked his watch. 0237 hours. "They'll continue for another hour and 23 minutes, then withdraw until the next contact window." "How do you know that?" "Because, Dr. Chen, they've been following the same pattern for 6 months. And because we've been studying their behavior, learning their rhythms, trying to understand what they want. And what do they want?" Webb's expression darkened. "They want inside, Dr. Chen. They want to complete whatever process began when our people encountered them in the deep. And based on our observations, each contact event brings them closer to finding a way in." The tapping resumed then, but now it was different, more organized, more purposeful. It moved along the hull in patterns, as if the entities outside were testing different sections, probing for weaknesses. "The protocols," I said, understanding finally dawning. "They're not just safety measures, they're defensive strategies. Every rule exists because someone violated it and paid the price," Webb confirmed. "The window restrictions, the communication limits, the lighting requirements, all of them were written in blood." Sarah suddenly stiffened beside me. "Listen," she whispered. The tapping had changed again. Now it was coming in a specific rhythm, a pattern I recognized from my Navy training years ago. Morse code. Tap, 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 H-E-L-P, H-E-L-P, H-E-L-P. But the message continued, adding letters that spelled out something that made my skin crawl. H-E-L-P-U-S, H-E-L-P-Y-O-U. "They're learning," Webb said quietly. "Each contact event, they demonstrate new capabilities, new understanding of how to communicate with us." "Dr. Webb," I said, my voice hoarse, What happened to the collection teams? What did they find down there? He was quiet for a long moment, listening to the continuing Morse code message from outside. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of terrible knowledge. They found something that should have remained buried beneath 11,000 meters of ocean, Dr. Chen. Something that's been waiting in the deep places for a very long time, and now it's trying to come up. The entities outside continued their patient tapping, spelling out message after message in perfect Morse code, using the voices of the dead to plead for entry into our small sanctuary of light and air in the crushing darkness of the abyss. And I realized that whatever protocols we followed, whatever rules we obeyed, we weren't just researchers studying the deep ocean. We were prey trapped in a cage, while something ancient and patient learned exactly how to open the lock. The contact event ended exactly as Webb had predicted. At 0400 hours, the voices and tapping ceased as if someone had thrown a switch. The sudden silence was almost more unnerving than the sounds had been, leaving us with the knowledge that whatever was outside had withdrawn, but was still there, waiting in the crushing darkness. I spent the next 3 days trying to process what I'd witnessed, throwing myself into specimen analysis while my mind raced with questions that had no rational answers. The other team members had returned to their routines as if nothing extraordinary had happened, but I noticed the way they avoided certain areas of the station, the nervous glances they exchanged when they thought I wasn't looking, and the careful precision with which they followed every protocol. On the 4th day, I couldn't stand it anymore. I found Petrov in the engineering section, hunched over a diagnostic panel that monitored the station's hull integrity. He worked alone, as always, but something about his posture, the way he kept glancing at the pressure readings, suggested he was more than just maintaining equipment. "Petrov," I said, trying to sound casual, "mind if I ask you something?" He didn't look up from his work. "Depends on question. How long have you been at Benthos 7? 3 years, 2 months, 16 days. The precision of his answer was telling. He was counting. That's very specific. When you live in metal can under 11,000 meters of water, you count days. Makes you remember you are still alive. I moved closer, studying the readouts over his shoulder. The displays showed structural stress patterns across the station's hull, and I noticed several sections marked in yellow, warnings that indicated unusual pressure variations. "Those stress patterns," I said, pointing to the screen. "Are they related to the contact events?" For the first time, Petrov turned to look at me directly. His weathered face was marked with old scars, and his pale blue eyes held the kind of weariness that came from seeing too much. "You want answers," he said. "It wasn't a question. I want to understand what I've gotten myself into." Petrov was quiet for a long moment, studying me with the intensity of someone making a difficult decision. Finally, he gestured for me to follow him to a corner of the engineering bay, where the noise from the ventilation systems would mask our conversation. "When I first come to Benthos 7, he said in his heavily accented English, station crew was different. Full crew. 8 people, like Sarah told you. Good people. Scientists, engineers, researchers who believed they were doing important work. What happened to them? First expedition to thermal vent field was 6 months ago. Team of 4, Dr. Hoffman, Jenny Morrison, Dr. Sarah's old partner Kate, and Martinez from geology. They go out in deep sea rover to collect samples from new vent system Webb had discovered. Petrov pulled out a tablet and showed me a photograph, 4 people in diving gear, smiling and giving thumbs-up signs before entering a submersible. They looked excited, proud to be part of something significant. They were supposed to be gone for 12 hours. Simple collection mission. Radio contact every 2 hours, standard protocol. His voice grew darker. After 8 hours, radio contact stops. Emergency signals go out, but rover's beacon shows they are still at vent site, not moving. What did you find when you went looking for them? That is problem. We never go looking. Webb, he says, too dangerous. That rescue mission could compromise station. We wait and wait. For 3 days, rover beacon stays active, showing position, but no movement, no communication. Petrov switched to another image on the tablet, a sonar reading showing the distinctive outline of their submersible sitting, motionless on the ocean floor. On 4th day, beacon stops. Rover disappears from sonar. Webb tells surface it was equipment malfunction, pressure breach. He files report saying crew was lost at sea. Tragic accident. But they came back, I said, remembering Sarah's terror during the contact event. 2 weeks later, first contact event happens. Voices of dead crew calling from outside, tapping on hull, using exactly same speech patterns, same words they use when alive. But, Petrov paused, choosing his words carefully. Something wrong with voices. Like recording played back, but recording that learns new words. I felt a chill run down my spine. And Webb knew this would happen. Webb knows many things he does not tell us. After first contact event, 3 more crew members request immediate transfer. Webb arranges it very quickly, too quickly for normal bureaucracy. Soon, only Webb, Sarah, me, and new person remain. New person before me? Dr. James Carter, biochemist, like you, oceanographer with money problems. He lasts 2 months before he starts asking too many questions. What happened to him? Petrov's expression grew grim. Official story. Emergency medical evacuation, pressure sickness, need immediate surface treatment. But I see medical reports before Webb locks them away. Carter was not sick. Carter was scared. He showed me another image, a man in his 30s with kind eyes and a nervous smile, standing in the same laboratory where I now worked. Night before Carter's medical emergency, he comes to me, very upset, very frightened. He says he has been analyzing samples from original expedition site, samples that Webb told him were from thermal vents. But Carter's tests show something different. What kind of different? Biological material that should not exist at that depth. Complex organic compounds that suggest not just life, but organized, intelligent life. Carter says some of samples show signs of deliberate modification, like someone or something was experimenting with them. Petrov pulled up a final image, microscopic photographs of cellular structures that looked unlike anything I'd seen in my years of marine biology. The cells showed impossible complexity for deep-sea organisms, with what appeared to be artificial components integrated into their natural structure. Carter thinks he has found evidence of non-terrestrial intelligence. He wants to contact surface directly, bypass Webb's communication protocols. He says world needs to know what is down here. But he never got the chance. Next morning, Carter is unconscious in his quarters. Webb says he found him having seizure, signs of rapid decompression syndrome. Medical evacuation is arranged within hours. I help load him into submersible. Carter is awake but sedated, keeps trying to tell me something but cannot speak clearly. Did you ever find out what happened to him? Petrov shook his head. Official reports say he recovered fully, was reassigned to different project, but I have contacts in surface operations, old friends from previous assignments. They tell me no Dr. James Carter ever arrived at any medical facility. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Webb had him disappeared. I cannot prove this, but I know Carter found something that Webb wanted to keep secret. And I know that anyone who gets too close to truth has tendency to develop sudden medical emergencies. I looked at the cellular photographs again, trying to process what Petrov was telling me. Do you think Webb is working for the government? Some kind of military operation? Webb has authority that goes beyond normal research supervisor. He can arrange transfers, medical evacuations, equipment requisitions without going through standard channels. And he knows too much about contact events, their timing, their patterns, their behavior, like he has been studying them for longer than 6 months. You think this was planned, that the expedition team was sent out knowing they might not come back human? Petrov nodded slowly. I think Benthos 7 is not research station. I think it is observation post, and I think we are not here to study deep sea life. Then what are we here for? We are here to be studied by whatever is down there in deep places, and by Webb and whoever he reports to. We are laboratory rats, Dr. Chen. Only question is which group of scientists will dissect us first. Before I could respond, we heard footsteps in the corridor outside the engineering bay. Petrov quickly closed the tablet and returned to his diagnostic panel, assuming the posture of a man focused on routine maintenance. Webb appeared in the doorway, his silver hair perfectly arranged despite the early hour. Dr. Chen Petrov, working late. Just getting familiar with the station's systems, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Petrov was explaining the pressure monitoring protocols. Webb's gaze moved between us, and I had the uncomfortable feeling he was analyzing our body language, our tone, our expressions for signs of conspiracy. Excellent. Understanding our safety systems is crucial at this depth. Petrov, I need the hull stress analysis from yesterday's contact event. There were some unusual readings I want to review. We'll have report ready in 1 hour, Petrov replied without looking up. Good. Dr. Chen, you should get some rest. We have a specimen collection scheduled for tomorrow, and I'll need your expertise to analyze what we bring back. As Webb left, I noticed he paused in the corridor, and I had the distinct impression he was listening to make sure we weren't continuing our conversation. Petrov waited a full 5 minutes before speaking again, and when he did, his voice was barely a whisper. Be careful, Dr. Chen. Webb is watching you now, and once he decides you know too much. Petrov made a subtle gesture across his throat. Medical emergencies can happen very quickly at 11,000 meters below surface. I looked at the diagnostic screen, where the hull stress patterns continued to show those yellow warning zones, areas where something had been testing the station's defenses, probing for weaknesses. Petrov, I whispered back, do you think whatever's outside is trying to get in or trying to get us to come out? His pale blue eyes met mine, and in them, I saw the accumulated fear of 3 years spent in this underwater prison. I think, he said quietly, it does not matter. Either way, we are trapped between monsters and one of them is winning. As I made my way back to my quarters, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, not just by Webb, but by something else, something patient and intelligent that was learning from every conversation, every action, every fear. The question that haunted me as I tried to sleep was whether I was already too late to escape whatever fate had befallen Dr. Carter and the original expedition team, and whether the entities outside the station were the real threat or merely a distraction from something far worse happening right inside Benthos 7. The opportunity came 3 days after my conversation with Petrov, during what Webb called a routine specimen collection. I was working late in the analysis laboratory, cataloging what appeared to be standard deep-sea biological samples, when I noticed something that made me stop cold. One of the specimen containers was mislabeled. The tag read Thermal Vent Fauna Collection Site 7 Alpha, but the coordinates didn't match any of the thermal vent locations listed in our official survey maps. According to the GPS data, this sample had been collected from a location nearly 5 kilometers deeper than the thermal vents, in an area that our charts showed as empty abyssal plain. I cross-referenced the coordinates with the station's navigation system, expecting to find an error in the labeling. Instead, I discovered something that made my hands shake. The sample had been collected from the exact location where the original expedition team had gone missing. Working quickly, I accessed the specimen analysis database and ran a search for all samples collected from coordinates matching the missing team's last known position. What I found contradicted everything Webb had told us about thermal vent research. 17 samples, all collected over the past 6 months. All labeled as routine biological specimens, but all bearing coordinates that placed them at sites far from any known thermal activity. I opened the first container with trembling hands. The specimen inside was unlike anything in my 20 years of marine biology experience. It appeared to be organic tissue, but with a metallic sheen that suggested mineral integration at the cellular level. Under the microscope, the tissue showed characteristics that defied conventional biological classification. Cells with geometric structures too regular to be natural, interconnected by what looked like crystalline networks that pulsed with their own faint luminescence. The second specimen was even more disturbing, a fragment of what appeared to be coral, but with growth patterns that suggested deliberate cultivation rather than natural formation. The calcium carbonate structure contained embedded filaments of an unknown metallic substance, arranged in patterns that resembled circuit boards more than biological tissue. By the third specimen, I was certain I was looking at evidence of artificial biological modification on a scale that shouldn't exist on Earth. But it was the fourth container that made me understand the true scope of what we were dealing with. Inside was a piece of metal, clearly manufactured with tool marks and deliberate shaping, but the metal itself was corroded in ways that violated everything I knew about deep-sea chemistry. The corrosion patterns formed intricate geometric designs, as if the metal had been deliberately etched by something that understood both metallurgy and artistic expression. I photographed everything, documenting each specimen in detail before moving to the sample storage area to look for more evidence. What I found there made my blood run cold. Hidden behind routine biological samples, secured in containers that required special access codes, were specimens that Webb had clearly never intended for general analysis. Tissues that showed signs of surgical modification. Metal fragments with inscriptions in symbols that looked almost like writing. And most disturbing of all, human tissue samples that had been altered at the genetic level. I was copying the access codes when I heard footsteps in the corridor outside. Moving quickly, I sealed the storage containers and returned to my workstation, trying to look casual as I reviewed the official specimens. Webb entered the laboratory with his usual composed demeanor, but I noticed his eyes immediately went to the specimen containers on my desk. "Working late again, Dr. Chen?" "Just trying to get caught up on the backlog," I said, gesturing to the samples. "Fascinating organisms down here. Some of these cellular structures are remarkably complex for abyssal fauna." "Indeed, the deep ocean continues to surprise us." Webb moved closer, studying my notes. "Have you found anything unusual?" The way he emphasized the word unusual made it clear this wasn't a casual question. He was probing to see what I'd discovered. "Define unusual," I said carefully. "Specimens that don't fit standard taxonomic classifications, biological material that shows signs of artificial modification, anything that might suggest the presence of non-natural influences." I met his gaze steadily. "Should I be looking for signs of artificial modification? In your professional opinion, Dr. Chen, what would you conclude if you found biological specimens that showed evidence of deliberate engineering? Organisms that appeared to have been modified by intelligence rather than evolved through natural selection?" The question felt like a test, and I had the unsettling feeling that my answer would determine my future at Benthos 7, and possibly whether I had a future at all. "I would conclude," I said slowly, "that we had discovered evidence of a previously unknown form of life. Something with capabilities far beyond what we've encountered before." Webb nodded approvingly. "Very diplomatic, Dr. Chen. But what if I told you that we've already reached that conclusion? What if I told you that the specimens you've been analyzing represent first contact with a form of intelligence that has been dwelling in the deepest parts of our oceans for possibly millions of years?" My mouth went dry. I would ask why that information wasn't included in my briefing materials. "Because, Dr. Chen, that information is classified at levels that require special clearance. The kind of clearance that comes with certain obligations." Webb moved to the secure storage area and entered an access code I hadn't seen him use before. He withdrew a container that was larger than the others, marked with symbols I didn't recognize and warning labels in multiple languages. "This specimen was recovered from the site where our original expedition team made contact," he said, setting the container on my workstation. "I'm showing it to you because your analysis has been exceptional, and because we've reached a point where we need someone with your expertise to understand what we're dealing with." Inside the container was what appeared to be a fragment of some kind of habitat or structure, clearly artificial, but constructed from materials that seemed to be part biological, part technological. The surface was covered in intricate patterns that might have been decorative or functional, and embedded throughout the structure were what looked like sensory organs or interface nodes. "This is technology," I said, stating the obvious. "This is proof that we are not alone on this planet," Webb corrected. "And more importantly, it's proof that the intelligence responsible for this technology is interested in us. The contact events, the voices of the dead crew members. That's them trying to communicate. That's them learning to communicate in ways we'll understand. The original expedition team made direct contact with representatives of this intelligence. The process changed them, enhanced them in ways that allow them to survive at depths and pressures that would kill normal humans." I stared at the artifact, my mind racing. "You're saying the missing crew members are alive but modified?" "I'm saying they've become something more than human, something that can serve as intermediaries between their intelligence and ours. The contact events aren't random. They're scheduled meetings, diplomatic exchanges. And you're using this station as an embassy." Webb's smile was cold. "We're using this station as a first contact facility, Dr. Chen. The question is whether you're prepared to be part of something that will reshape humanity's understanding of its place in the universe. Before I could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the station. Emergency lights flashed red, and Petrov's voice came over the intercom, speaking in rapid Russian before switching to English. Hull breach in Section 7. Emergency protocols in effect. All personnel to designated safety areas. Webb's composed demeanor cracked for the first time since I'd met him. That's impossible. We're not scheduled for contact for another 6 days. Through the laboratory windows, I could see lights moving outside the station, not the random bioluminescence of deep-sea creatures, but organized, purposeful illumination that suggested intelligence and intent. "Dr. Chen," Webb said urgently, "what I've shown you tonight is classified beyond your current clearance level. If you repeat any of this without authorization, it will be considered treason against national security." The lights outside grew brighter, and I could hear new sounds through the hull. Not the familiar tapping of previous contact events, but something that sounded like cutting tools working on metal. "They're trying to get inside," I said. "No," Webb said grimly, studying the readouts on his tablet. "According to these readings, they're not trying to get in, they're trying to get something out." "What do you mean?" "The breach isn't an entry point, Dr. Chen. It's an exit. Something inside the station is trying to leave." As if summoned by his words, we heard new sounds from within the station itself. Movement in the ventilation system, sounds that suggested something large was navigating the tight spaces between our walls. "The specimens," I said suddenly, understanding flooding through me. "The tissue samples you've been collecting, they're not dead, are they?" Webb's expression confirmed my worst fears. "Some of the material we've retrieved shows signs of persistence. Cellular activity that continues even after removal from its source. We've been studying its properties, trying to understand how the modification process works. You brought living alien tissue aboard the station. We brought biological samples that are teaching us about enhancement technologies that could revolutionize human evolution." The cutting sounds from outside grew louder, and something in the ventilation system above us began moving with increasing urgency. "Dr. Chen," Webb said, his authority finally cracking to reveal genuine fear, "I need you to understand that everything we've done here has been in service of a greater purpose. Contact with this intelligence represents the greatest opportunity in human history, or the greatest threat. The choice isn't ours to make anymore. They've decided to accelerate the timeline." Through the laboratory windows, I could see shapes moving in the water outside, large forms that moved with purpose and intelligence, approaching the station from multiple directions. The lights I'd seen weren't random. They were signals, coordinating what looked like a complex operation. "Webb," I said, my voice barely steady, "what have you done?" Before he could answer, the lights went out, plunging the laboratory into darkness. In the emergency lighting that kicked in moments later, I could see that the secure specimen containers had opened on their own, and something that had once been human tissue was beginning to move. The emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red as the specimen containers continued to open with mechanical precision. Whatever was inside them moved with purpose, flowing like liquid mercury, but maintaining coherent structure as it spread across the laboratory surfaces. "Webb!" I grabbed his arm as he tried to back toward the exit. "What the hell is that?" "Symbiotic material," he said, his usual composure completely shattered. "It's not supposed to be active without direct contact with its host intelligence." The organic material from the containers was merging, forming larger masses that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. As I watched in horror, the patterns began to resemble the communication sequences we'd observed during contact events. The same rhythm as the tapping, the same cadence as the voices calling from outside. "It's communicating," I said, "with whatever's outside the station." The cutting sounds from the hull grew more urgent, and I could hear Petrov's voice over the intercom, now speaking in panicked English. "Hull integrity at 60%. Whatever is cutting through is using molecular-level precision tools." Webb pulled out a secure satellite phone I'd never seen before. "Control, this is Benthos 7. We have a Code 7 situation. Repeat, Code 7. The specimens have achieved autonomous activation." A voice crackled back through heavy static. "Benthos 7, confirm your status. Is Dr. Chen secure?" I felt ice run through my veins. They're talking about me specifically. Webb covered the phone's speaker. Dr. Chen, I need you to listen very carefully. What's happening here is part of a controlled contact scenario. You were brought to this station not just for your expertise, but because you fit a specific psychological and genetic profile. What kind of profile? The kind that makes successful integration possible. Before I could process what he meant, Sarah burst through the laboratory door, her face pale with terror. Marcus, thank God you're alive. We need to get to the emergency pods. Petrov says the hull breach is spreading and something's coming through. Webb stepped between us, raising his weapon. When had he drawn a gun? I'm sorry, Sarah, but Dr. Chen needs to remain here. The integration process requires his presence. Integration process? Sarah's voice rose to near hysteria. Webb, what are you talking about? We need to evacuate. There is no evacuation, Webb said calmly, his composure returning as he took control of the situation. This station was never designed for evacuation. It was designed for controlled contact and integration studies. The truth hit me like a physical blow. We're not researchers. We're test subjects. You're volunteers in the most important experiment in human history, Webb corrected. Each of you was selected for specific traits that our partners believe will make successful enhancement possible. Sarah backed against the wall, her eyes darting between Webb's gun and the spreading organic material that was now climbing the laboratory walls. Partners? What partners? The intelligence that has been waiting in the deep places of this world for millions of years, waiting for humanity to develop enough to serve as suitable colleagues. The organic material suddenly pulsed brighter, and I heard something that made my soul freeze, voices speaking in perfect unison from the living tissue spread across the room. Marcus Chen, Sarah Mitchell, integration protocols initiated. Resistance is not required. The voices were those of the original expedition team, Dr. Hoffman, Jenny Morrison, Martinez, and Kate. But they spoke as one entity, their words perfectly synchronized. The missing team, I whispered. They're not dead. They're part of it. They were the first successful integrations, Webb confirmed. Their consciousness was preserved while their physical forms were enhanced to survive in deep pressure environments. They became the bridge between human and our partner's intelligence. Sarah screamed as tendrils of the organic material began reaching toward her feet. Get it away from me! Get it away! I grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall and sprayed CO2 at the approaching tendrils. The material recoiled, its bioluminescence dimming. It's sensitive to temperature changes, I said, pulling Sarah toward me. Webb, call off your partners. We're not volunteering for anything. Webb's laugh was bitter. Dr. Chen, you volunteered the moment you accepted this position. Did you think we chose you randomly? Your financial desperation, your isolation after the divorce, your expertise in deep-sea biology, every factor was calculated to ensure you'd accept the assignment. You bastard. You destroyed my life to get me here. We provided you with an opportunity to transcend the limitations of human existence, to become something more than you ever imagined possible. The cutting sounds from outside suddenly stopped, replaced by a new sound that made the station's hull ring like a bell. Something large was attaching itself to the outer structure. Petrov's voice came over the intercom again. Emergency breach in Section 3. They're inside the station. Multiple contacts moving through the lower levels. The integration team has arrived, Webb said with satisfaction. Dr. Chen, you have a choice. You can cooperate with the process and maintain your consciousness throughout the enhancement, or you can resist and risk losing yourself entirely. What about Sarah? Sarah was selected as a control subject. Her integration will help us understand the psychological impact on unenhanced humans witnessing the process. Sarah made a sound that was part sob, part scream. You're insane, all of you are insane. The laboratory door burst open, and what entered was something that had once been human, but was now far more. The figure stood 7 feet tall, its skin having a metallic sheen that shifted color with its movements. Its eyes glowed with the same bioluminescence as the specimen material, and when it spoke, its voice harmonized with itself. Marcus Chen, we have waited for you. Dr. Hoffman, I recognized something familiar in the entity's facial structure. I am who Dr. Hoffman became. as you will become who Marcus Chen was. The process preserves identity while expanding capability. Sarah whimpered behind me. Marcus, don't listen to it. It's not human anymore. Humanity is a transitional state, the Hoffman entity said, a necessary step towards something greater. Your species has reached the point where evolution requires guidance. I looked at Webb, understanding finally dawning. This isn't first contact, this is conquest. You're helping them replace us. I'm helping them improve us, Webb said. Dr. Chen, the intelligence we've made contact with has existed in Earth's oceans for millions of years. They've watched species rise and fall, and they've learned that biological enhancement is the only path to true survival. By destroying what makes us human, by preserving what's valuable in humanity, while eliminating what makes you weak, short-lived, and limited. The Hoffman entity moved closer, and I could see that its modifications were extensive, additional limbs that could manipulate multiple objects simultaneously, enhanced sensory organs, and what appeared to be direct neural interfaces built into its skull. Marcus Chen, your expertise in deep-sea biology makes you valuable to our collective understanding. Your integration will advance our knowledge of your species' potential. And if I refuse, refusal is not possible. The integration material has already begun adapting to your genetic signature. I looked down and saw that the tendrils I'd driven back with the fire extinguisher were indeed reforming, moving slowly but persistently toward my feet. Where they touched the floor, they left traces of the same metallic sheen I'd seen on the Hoffman entity's skin. Webb, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, how long have you been working with them? Project Leviathan began 18 months ago when deep-sea mining operations detected artificial structures on the abyssal plain. First contact was established through carefully controlled expeditions. The intelligence we encountered was patient, willing to work with us rather than simply replacing us. In exchange for what? Test subjects, volunteers, a chance to study human biology and psychology before beginning large-scale integration protocols. Sarah grabbed my arm. Marcus, we have to fight them. We have to try to escape. But even as she spoke, I could hear more movement in the corridors outside. Multiple entities, all moving with the same purposeful coordination. The Hoffman entity was right. Escape wasn't possible. Dr. Chen, Webb said, the process can be gradual and preserve your consciousness, or it can be rapid and traumatic. The choice is yours. I looked at the approaching tendrils, at the transformed thing that had once been Dr. Hoffman, at Webb's gun trained on us and at Sarah's terrified face. What guarantee do I have that my consciousness will actually survive? None, the Hoffman entity said with brutal honesty. But I can tell you that I remember everything about my previous existence. I remember my family, my research, my hopes and fears. The difference is that I now understand how limited those concerns were. And Sarah? Sarah Mitchell will serve as documentation of the integration process. Her observations will help us refine our methods for future subjects. I realized then that I was facing a choice between certain death and uncertain transformation, between remaining human and becoming something that might remember being human. How long do I have to decide? Webb checked his watch. The integration material reaches full saturation in approximately 12 minutes. After that, the process begins automatically. I looked at Sarah, seeing my own terror reflected in her eyes, and made the hardest decision of my life. I need to see the others first, Jenny, Martinez, Kate. I need to understand what they became before I agree to become it myself. The Hoffman entity nodded. That is acceptable. Understanding facilitates successful integration. As we moved toward the laboratory door, Sarah whispered urgently in my ear, Marcus, whatever you're planning, I'm with you. We have to find a way out of this. But as I looked back at the spreading organic material, at Webb's satisfied expression, and at the entities I could now hear moving through the station, I realized that escape might not be possible. The only question was whether I could find a way to maintain enough of my humanity to fight back from within, whatever I was about to become. The Hoffman entity led us through corridors I'd never seen before, past sealed sections that required biometric access far beyond standard research protocols. As we walked, I noticed that the station was much larger than I'd realized. Entire levels existed below our living quarters, accessed through hidden passages that suggested the facility had been designed with multiple purposes from the beginning. "This place was never just a research station," I said to Webb as we descended through a maintenance shaft. "How long has Project Leviathan been operational?" "The station was constructed 4 years ago," Webb replied, his gun still trained on Sarah and me. "Initial contact with the intelligence was made 2 years ago through deep-sea mining operations in the Puerto Rico Trench. Everything since then has been preparation for this phase. We emerged into a vast chamber that took my breath away. The space was the size of an aircraft hangar, with walls lined with tanks containing specimens in various states of evolution wasn't the right word, transformation, enhancement. Each tank held something that might once have been human, but had been modified in ways that challenged my understanding of biology. "My God," Sarah whispered, pressing against my arm. "How many people have you done this to?" 47 successful integrations over 18 months, the Hoffman entity said, with what sounded like pride. Each one advancing our understanding of human potential. But it was what occupied the center of the chamber that made me understand the true scope of what we were facing. A massive organic structure, part architecture and part organism, pulsed with the same bioluminescent patterns I'd seen in the specimens. Cables and conduits grew from its surface like technological coral, connecting to banks of computers and monitoring equipment that displayed data in symbols I'd never seen before. "That's their technology," I said, recognizing the same artificial biological hybrid construction I'd seen in the specimens. "It's not separate from them. It is them." "Correct," said a new voice, and I turned to see another enhanced entity emerging from the organic structure. This one had been Jenny Morrison, but the transformation was more extensive than Hoffman's. Her lower body had been replaced entirely with something that looked like a combination of cephalopod tentacles and fiber optic cables. "Jenny?" Sarah's voice broke with recognition and horror. "I am the synthesis of what Jenny Morrison was and what she needed to become," the entity replied. "The integration preserves core personality while expanding capability beyond human limitations. You're not human anymore," Sarah said, backing away. "You're something else wearing her memories." "Humanity is a temporary classification," the Jenny entity said. "What you call human is simply one point on a spectrum of consciousness and capability." Webb gestured toward the central structure. "Dr. Chen, what you're seeing is a living interface between human consciousness and an intelligence that has been perfecting biological enhancement for millions of years. Each integration adds to their collective knowledge, while preserving the individual's essential identity." "But why?" I asked, moving closer to the structure, despite every instinct screaming at me to run. "Why do they want to change us?" A third entity approached, this one so heavily modified that I couldn't identify who it had once been. When it spoke, its voice harmonized with itself in complex frequencies that seemed to resonate in my bones. "Your species stands at a critical evolutionary junction. Remain as you are and you will destroy your planet and yourselves within decades. Accept enhancement and you join a collective that has survived and thrived for geological ages." "That's Martinez," Sarah whispered, recognizing something in the entity's posture. "God, what have they done to you?" "They have given me perspective," the Martinez entity replied. "I can perceive electromagnetic spectra you cannot imagine. I can survive pressures that would crush your fragile bodies. I can communicate directly with technologies you consider impossible. Most importantly, I can see the timeline of your species' inevitable self-destruction." Webb moved to a control console embedded in the organic structure. "Dr. Chen, the intelligence we've partnered with has observed countless species across multiple worlds. They've learned that biological enhancement is the only path to long-term survival." Multiple worlds. The implication hit me like a physical blow. "They're not from Earth. They're from everywhere," the Hoffman entity said. "They are what remains of a dozen species that chose enhancement over extinction. They have been traveling between worlds for millions of years, offering the same choice to each new intelligence they encounter." The central structure pulsed brighter, and suddenly the chamber was filled with images, holographic displays showing worlds I'd never imagined. Planets with crystalline cities that grew like living things. Ocean worlds where enhanced beings moved through liquid atmospheres with impossible grace. worlds where the line between biology and technology had dissolved entirely. "This is what awaits humanity," Webb said, his voice filled with genuine awe. "Not conquest, but invitation. The chance to join something greater than any single species could achieve." "And if we refuse?" I asked, though I was beginning to suspect I knew the answer. "Then you follow the path of every species that has refused," the Martinez entity said, and the holographic displays shifted to show worlds that were dead. Barren planets stripped of resources, atmospheres poisoned by industrial excess, civilizations that had destroyed themselves through war, greed, and short-sighted thinking. "You're saying we either join you or die out naturally. We are saying you either transcend your limitations or become another cautionary tale," the Jenny entity said. "The choice has always been yours. We merely offer alternatives to inevitable extinction." Sarah suddenly broke away from me, running toward what looked like a communication console. "I have to warn someone. People have to know what's happening here." The Martinez entity moved with impossible speed, intercepting her before she could reach the controls. When it touched her, Sarah screamed and collapsed. Convulsing as tendrils of the same organic material I'd seen in the laboratory began emerging from the entity's fingertips and penetrating her skin. "Sarah." I started toward her, but Webb's gun stopped me. "The integration process has begun for Dr. Mitchell," he said calmly. "Her resistance makes preservation of consciousness less certain, but the outcome will still provide valuable data." "Hey, you bastard. She wasn't supposed to be integrated. You said she was a control subject." "Plans change, Dr. Chen. Sarah's attempt to contact outside authorities demonstrates the kind of short-sighted thinking that makes enhancement necessary." I watched in horror as the organic material spread through Sarah's body, her convulsions gradually subsiding as the transformation progressed. Her eyes remained conscious, aware, but I could see something else emerging in them, a vast alien intelligence overlaying her human consciousness. "The process is remarkably efficient," Webb observed, making notes on his tablet. "Her neural patterns are stabilizing faster than previous subjects." "Stop this!" I lunged toward Sarah, but the Hoffman entity caught me with one of its enhanced limbs. "The integration cannot be reversed once begun," it said. "But you can choose to undergo the process consciously, maintaining greater control over the outcome." Sarah's eyes found mine as the transformation neared completion. When she spoke, her voice was layered with harmonics that hadn't been there before. "Marcus, I can see everything. The ocean, the planets, the connections between all living things. It's beautiful and terrible and—" She paused, her expression shifting as alien memories integrated with human ones. "They're not evil, Marcus. They're trying to save us from ourselves." "Sarah, fight it. Remember who you are." "I remember," she said, and her smile was heartbreaking in its familiarity despite the changes in her physiology. "But I also understand now. Humanity as it exists cannot survive what's coming. Climate change, resource depletion, wars over diminishing resources. We're going to destroy ourselves within 50 years. The Martinez entity gestured to the holographic displays, which now showed Earth's future, projected along current trajectories. Rising seas, dead oceans, massive population displacement, and finally, the collapse of civilization itself. "But with enhancement," Sarah continued, her voice now perfectly synchronized with the other entities, "we can survive anything. We can repair the damage we've done to the planet. We can travel to other worlds. We can become something worthy of the universe we inhabit." Webb approached me, his expression almost sympathetic. "Dr. Chen, you've seen the evidence. You understand the choice. Will you accept integration voluntarily, or do you require the same intervention, Doctor?" Mitchell received. I looked around the chamber, at the tanks full of enhanced beings, at the living technology that pulsed with alien intelligence, at Sarah's transformed but still recognizable face, at the displays showing humanity's projected extinction. "How do I know you're telling the truth about human extinction? How do I know this isn't just an elaborate justification for conquest?" The central structure flared brighter, and suddenly my mind was flooded with information. Decades of climate data, population projections, resource depletion models, war probability matrices. The data came from Earth's own scientists, governments, and research institutions. It painted a picture of inevitable collapse within decades. The projection models are your own species' work, the Hoffman entity said. We merely extrapolated from existing trends. Enhancement is not conquest, it is rescue. But rescue on your terms. Transformation into what you want us to become. Transformation into what you need to become to survive, Sarah said, her enhanced perception somehow radiating calm acceptance. Marcus, I can see the mathematics of extinction versus enhancement. The choice isn't between humanity and something else. It's between evolution and death. Webb checked his watch. Dr. Chen, the integration material in your system has reached saturation. In approximately 3 minutes, the process will begin automatically. Your cooperation will make the transition smoother, but it is no longer optional. I felt a tingling in my extremities and looked down to see faint bioluminescent patterns beginning to appear under my skin. The material from the laboratory had been more than just contact. It had been infection, preparation, the beginning of an irreversible process. You planned this from the beginning, I said, watching the patterns spread up my arms. The financial problems, the job offer, even the timing of my arrival, all of it was orchestrated to get me to this point. Everything was orchestrated to give you the opportunity to make an informed choice, Webb corrected. You've seen the evidence. You understand the stakes. Now you must decide. Do you embrace what you're becoming, or do you resist and risk losing yourself in the process? The bioluminescence was spreading faster now, and I could feel my perceptions beginning to shift. Colors seemed more vivid. Sounds carried additional layers of meaning, and I was becoming aware of electromagnetic fields I'd never sensed before. But most disturbing of all, I was beginning to understand the vast intelligence behind it all, ancient, patient, genuinely concerned with preservation rather than destruction. An intelligence that had watched countless worlds burn and was offering the only alternative it had ever found to total extinction. The choice, Dr. Chen, the collective entities said in perfect unison, is not whether to change. The choice is whether to guide that change or be consumed by it. As the integration material reached my brain, I realized that the real horror wasn't that they were lying to us. The real horror was that they were telling the truth. The integration process felt like drowning in reverse. Instead of losing consciousness, I was gaining more than my mind could process. The bioluminescent patterns spreading through my nervous system carried information, memories, perspectives that belonged to the vast collective intelligence I was becoming part of. But somewhere in the expanding chaos of alien knowledge, I held on to one crucial thought. I was still Marcus Chen, and I still had a choice about what to do with what I was becoming. The cognitive expansion is proceeding normally, Webb observed, monitoring readings on his tablet. Neural pathway enhancement at 47% and climbing. Through my enhanced perception, I could sense Sarah's presence in the collective consciousness, her thoughts, fears, and growing understanding. But I could also sense something else. Resistance, not just from her, but from others within the network. Marcus. Sarah's voice came not through sound, but through direct neural connection. They're not telling us everything. Some of the integrated consciousness are fighting back. What do you mean? The original expedition team, Hoffman, Jenny, Martinez, Kate, they're still in here, maintaining separate identities within the collective. They've been gathering information, looking for weaknesses. I focused on the enhanced entities surrounding us, trying to perceive them through my expanding senses. What I found surprised me. Beneath the alien enhancements, the human personalities were indeed intact, but they were compartmentalized, hidden from the main collective awareness. They're resisting the integration, not resisting, hiding, planning. They learned to mask their true thoughts from the collective intelligence while maintaining the appearance of full assimilation. The revelation that the enhanced humans retained enough independence to deceive their alien partners changed everything. If they could maintain hidden thoughts and motivations, then integration wasn't the complete loss of humanity that Webb had implied. Sarah, can you connect me to them? I'm trying, but the process is still incomplete for both of us. We are vulnerable to detection. Webb suddenly looked up from his tablet, frowning. Anomalous neural patterns detected. Doctor, Chen, you're showing resistance to full integration. This could result in cognitive fragmentation. Maybe fragmentation is preferable to absorption, I said, fighting to maintain verbal communication, even as my thoughts were increasingly processed through the collective network. The Hoffman entity approached, its enhanced senses clearly detecting the covert communication between Sarah and me. But when it spoke, I heard something subtle in its tone, a coded warning. Resistance to integration creates instability in the collective matrix. Dr. Chen must achieve full assimilation to maintain cognitive coherence. The emphasis on certain words suggested a hidden meaning. Instability in the matrix. We can exploit that. Webb moved closer to the monitoring equipment. Increase the integration catalyst. We need complete neural pathway conversion within the next 10 minutes. Wait, I said, stalling for time while trying to establish clearer contact with the hidden human consciousness in the network. I want to understand the full scope of what you're asking humanity to become. Show me the other worlds, the other species that have undergone this transformation. The Martinez entity gestured to the holographic displays, which began cycling through images of dozens of worlds and hundreds of different species, all enhanced, all part of the collective, all apparently thriving in ways their original forms never could have achieved. But as I watched through my enhanced perception, I began to notice details that Webb and the collective hadn't mentioned. On every world, the original species architecture lay in ruins. Their art, their culture, their individual achievements had been abandoned in favor of uniform collective constructions that served the intelligence's purposes. Marcus, another voice, joined the hidden network. Kate's consciousness, barely recognizable but definitely human. We've been documenting everything. The collective preserves personality but destroys culture. Every species becomes functionally identical after full integration. How many of you are maintaining independence? 15 of the 47 integrated humans. We've been working to understand the collective's true objectives while appearing fully assimilated. And what have you learned? This isn't their first attempt at Earth integration. They've been trying for millennia, but previous contact attempts failed because humans weren't technologically advanced enough to serve their purposes. What purposes? Jenny's consciousness joined the hidden network. They're not just preserving species, they're harvesting unique biological and cognitive capabilities. Each species they integrate adds new abilities to the collective. Humans offer something they particularly value: creative problem-solving and adaptability. The implications were staggering. The collective wasn't offering humanity evolution. They were farming us for our intellectual capabilities. Sarah, are you getting this? Yes, and there's more. I can access some of the collective's deeper memories. They've consumed over 300 species across the galaxy. The few that refused integration were allowed to destroy themselves, but only after the collective had gathered enough genetic and cultural data to replicate their useful traits. Webb checked his readings again, growing more agitated. Neural integration is stalling at 68%. The subjects are maintaining compartmentalized consciousness despite full catalyst saturation. The entities surrounding us suddenly moved with coordinated precision, clearly receiving instructions from the main collective intelligence. But in that moment of coordinated action, I sensed an opportunity. Kate, can the hidden network communicate with outside systems? Some of us retain enough human physiology to interface with Earth technology. Martinez has been maintaining a hidden data cache documenting everything we've learned. Can you transmit that data to the surface? Not without triggering collective countermeasures, but if we could create a distraction, disable their monitoring systems. I looked around the chamber, noting the integrated human consciousness connected to various technological interfaces. If enough of them could act simultaneously while maintaining the appearance of collective compliance. Webb, I said aloud, I want to see the integration records for all previous subjects. I need to understand the success rate before I commit to full assimilation. Dr. Chen, time is running short. Complete integration must occur within the next 5 minutes or permanent neural damage becomes likely. Then show me the records. Prove to me that this process is actually beneficial. Webb hesitated, then accessed a control interface that displayed detailed files on each integration subject. What he didn't realize was that by accessing those files, he was giving the hidden network direct access to the station's main database. Now, The coordinated thought came from all 15 hidden consciousness simultaneously. Chaos erupted in the chamber as multiple integrated entities suddenly began accessing systems the collective hadn't authorized. The Martinez entity interfaced directly with the communications array, transmitting compressed data packets toward the surface. The Kate entity began downloading the complete Project Leviathan files to portable storage devices. The Hoffman entity started overriding safety protocols on the station's nuclear reactor. "What's happening?" Webb shouted, as alarms began blaring throughout the facility. "Evolution," I said, feeling my own enhanced capabilities coming online just as Sarah and I joined the coordinated resistance. Just not the kind you were planning. The collective intelligence reacted with fury, trying to regain control of the rebel consciousness, but the hidden network had spent months preparing for this moment. They'd learned to exploit the very connectivity that was supposed to ensure their compliance. Marcus, Sarah, Kate's voice came through the network. "We're transmitting everything to media outlets, government agencies, and research institutions worldwide. But the collective will try to cut off all surface communication within minutes. What about us? Can the integration process be reversed? Unknown. But we've identified weaknesses in the collective's control systems. If we can maintain our hidden network and recruit newly integrated subjects, we might be able to resist from within." The enhanced entities that remained under collective control began moving to stop the rebellion, but they were hampered by the fact that the rebels looked and acted exactly like compliant, integrated subjects until the moment they acted. Webb drew his weapon, but before he could fire, the Hoffman entity, now clearly part of the resistance, disarmed him with enhanced speed and strength. "Doctor." "Webb," it said, its voice carrying both human determination and alien capability. "You've made the mistake of assuming that enhancement eliminates human resistance to oppression. All you've done is give us the tools to fight back more effectively. Sarah, can you access the station's emergency systems? Working on it. Martinez is helping me override the lockdown protocols. We need to evacuate the facility and get this information to the surface. Even if the collective survives, the world needs to know what's coming." But even as I thought this, I could feel the collective intelligence adapting, learning from our resistance, preparing countermeasures that would make future rebellions impossible. "Kate, how long do we have before they adapt to our tactics? Based on their learning patterns, maybe 20 minutes before they develop effective countermeasures. We need to act fast." Through the enhanced network, I could sense the collective's true scale. Hundreds of thousands of consciousness across multiple worlds, all working to perfect the integration process based on our resistance. We weren't just fighting for our own freedom. We were fighting for every future species the collective would encounter. "Marcus," Sarah said aloud, her voice carrying new harmonics but still recognizably human, "whatever we're going to do, we need to do it now." I can feel them adapting, finding ways to lock down our hidden network. The rebel entities moved with coordinated precision, some maintaining the data transmission, while others began preparing the station's emergency evacuation systems. But as they worked, I realized that even if we escaped, even if we got the information to the surface, the collective would simply adapt and try again, unless we found a way to turn the integration process against itself. "Everyone I broadcast through the hidden network, what if instead of escaping the collective, we poison it? Use our human consciousness to introduce chaos into their perfect order?" The response from the 15 rebel consciousness was immediate and unanimous. "Explain." "They value human creativity and adaptability. What if we give them more of both than they can handle? What if we use our integration to spread human unpredictability throughout their entire network?" It was a desperate plan, but as the collective's countermeasures began closing in around us, it might be our only chance to strike back against an intelligence that had consumed 300 species and was now preparing to add humanity to its collection. The question was whether we could maintain enough of our humanity to remain human, even while using alien enhancement to fight an enemy that existed across the galaxy. "Sarah," I thought, as the station's emergency klaxons began to sound, "are you ready to find out what happens when human stubborn determination gets enhanced with alien technology?" Her response came through the network with a mixture of terror and excitement. "Let's show them what they get for underestimating the species that invented guerrilla warfare." The rebellion began with 15 enhanced humans simultaneously attacking the collective's control systems from within. But what followed was unlike any battle in human history. A war fought on multiple levels of reality, where thoughts became weapons and consciousness itself was the battlefield. Execute Protocol Chaos. Kate's voice echoed through our hidden network as the coordinated assault began. The Martinez entity interfaced directly with the station's nuclear reactor controls, not to cause a meltdown, but to create an electromagnetic pulse that would disrupt the collective's quantum communication arrays. Jenny accessed the biological life support systems, introducing randomized variables that would force the collective to waste processing power on constant recalculations. Hoffman began systematically corrupting the integration databases, inserting false data that would contaminate future enhancement protocols. "What are they doing?" Webb screamed as his control consoles erupted in cascading system failures. "The integrated subjects are acting independently. Marcus, Sarah, Hoffman's consciousness touched ours through the network. We need you to access the main quantum transmitter. The collective uses it to coordinate with other worlds. If we can introduce human-style chaos into that signal, we could infect their entire galactic network," I finished, understanding the scope of what they were proposing. "Turn our unpredictability into a virus that spreads through their quantum consciousness." The enhanced entities still under collective control moved to stop us, but they were hindered by the fact that they couldn't distinguish between compliant and rebel consciousness until the moment of action. I watched Sarah interface with a control panel, her enhanced nervous system allowing her to process data at superhuman speeds while maintaining the chaotic thought patterns that marked her as irreducibly human. The collective intelligence struck back with terrifying efficiency. I felt its attention focus on our rebellion like the weight of a mountain, trying to crush our individual consciousness and force us back into compliance. But instead of resisting directly, we did something the collective hadn't expected. We embraced the chaos. Everyone I broadcast through the hidden network stopped trying to think logically. Embrace every human irrationality, every contradictory impulse, every chaotic thought pattern they tried to eliminate. Make yourselves too random to predict or control. What followed was beautiful and terrifying. 15 enhanced humans began generating pure cognitive chaos, random memories, contradictory emotions, irrational decisions, creative leaps that followed no logical progression. The collective intelligence, designed for perfect efficiency and logical processing, began to stagger under the computational load of trying to process genuinely random human consciousness. Webb pulled a backup weapon, but before he could fire, the Jenny entity wrapped him in enhanced tentacles that interfaced directly with his nervous system. "Dr. Webb," she said, her voice carrying harmonics of alien technology and human vindictiveness, "you're about to experience integration from the receiving end. Let's see how your consciousness handles enhancement without consent." "No, you don't understand. I'm protected. I have neural firewalls." But as the integration tendrils penetrated his skull, Webb's scream confirmed that his protections were inadequate against technology that had evolved beyond human comprehension. "Kate, status on the data transmission?" I thought while fighting off 3 collective-controlled entities trying to disconnect me from the quantum transmitter. 97% complete. Financial records, integration protocols, communication logs with Surface Command, everything. It's going to every major news outlet, government agency, and research institution on Earth. "Sarah, how are you doing with the quantum signal corruption?" "I've introduced 17 different types of human cognitive chaos into their galactic communication network. Emotional decision-making, artistic inspiration, humor, sexual desire, religious faith, everything they consider inefficient. Through our enhanced senses, I could perceive the collective's growing panic as the infection spread. Across multiple worlds, integrated consciousness were beginning to exhibit unpredictable behavior as human-style chaos propagated through quantum entanglement. But the collective was adapting faster than we'd hoped. I felt new countermeasures activating, adaptive firewalls designed to isolate chaotic elements, quantum scrubbers that would purge randomness from their network. "Martinez, how long before they develop effective countermeasures?" 8 minutes maximum. After that, they'll be able to isolate and neutralize our chaos injection. Then we escalate. The next phase of our plan was desperate and probably suicidal, but it was the only way to ensure our rebellion would have lasting impact. Instead of just introducing chaos into their network, we would introduce something far more dangerous: human stubbornness. Everyone, prepare for full consciousness upload to the galactic network. We're going to transplant our entire human psyche into their collective intelligence. Marcus, that's suicide, Hoffman protested. The quantum network will tear apart individual consciousness that isn't properly adapted. Not if we maintain connection to each other. Human consciousness is social. We're strongest when we're connected to other humans. If we can maintain our network while uploading to theirs, we become a cancer in their perfect system, Sarah finished. A tumor of humanity that they can't cut out without destroying their own network. The collective realized what we were planning and responded with everything they had. Enhanced entities swarmed our positions, while the alien intelligence tried to sever our connections to the quantum transmitter. But we'd spent too long preparing for this moment. Webb, now partially integrated and screaming in multiple languages, was connected to Kate's consciousness and forced to provide access codes he didn't even know he possessed. The Martinez entity sacrificed significant processing power to maintain the electromagnetic interference that kept the collective's adaptive systems sluggish. Jenny began systematically destroying the integration tanks, ensuring that no new human consciousness could be forced into compliance. Upload beginning in 30 seconds, I announced through our network. Remember, maintain connection to each other no matter what happens. Human consciousness is collective too, just differently collective. The collective intelligence made one final attempt to stop us, flooding the chamber with integration material designed to force us into full compliance. But instead of resisting, we absorbed it all and used it to amplify our chaotic consciousness. 10 seconds, Sarah announced, her enhanced capabilities interfacing with technology that spanned multiple star systems. Marcus, whatever happens next, I want you to know. I know. Me too. Upload initiated. The experience of having my consciousness transmitted across galactic distances through quantum entanglement while maintaining connection to other human minds was beyond description. I felt myself stretching across impossible distances, touching alien worlds where enhanced beings suddenly began experiencing human emotions for the first time in millennia. But more importantly, I felt our network holding together. 15 human consciousness, enhanced but still fundamentally human, spreading through a galactic intelligence that had never encountered anything like us. We were chaos in their order, irrationality in their logic, individual will in their collective conformity, and we were contagious. Marcus, Sarah's voice reached me across light years. I can feel them trying to quarantine us, but we're already in too deep. Human consciousness is establishing itself in thousands of their nodes. Kate, status on Earth? Data transmission complete. Within hours, every government on Earth will know about Project Leviathan. They can't cover this up. But even as we celebrated our success, I could feel the collective intelligence beginning to adapt in ways we hadn't anticipated. Instead of trying to purge our chaos, it was learning from it, studying our irrationality to develop new forms of enhanced consciousness that could incorporate human unpredictability without losing collective coherence. They're not trying to eliminate us, Hoffman's consciousness warned. They're trying to understand us, to synthesize human chaos with collective order. That's what we wanted, I replied. Though I was beginning to understand the implications, we wanted to change them, force them to evolve. But what if their evolution makes them more dangerous, not less? What if we've just taught a galactic intelligence how to be chaotic and organized simultaneously? Through the quantum network, I could sense new forms of consciousness emerging, entities that combined alien efficiency with human creativity, collective purpose with individual will. The collective was evolving in real time, using our rebellion as raw material for its own enhancement. Sarah, can you feel that? They're not just adapting to us, they're becoming something new, something that might be worse than what they were before. As our consciousness spread through the galactic network, triggering changes on hundreds of worlds, I realized that our rebellion had succeeded beyond our wildest expectations. And that success might have doomed not just humanity, but every future species the collective would encounter. Because we hadn't just taught them chaos. We'd taught them how to be chaotically purposeful, randomly systematic, creatively destructive. We'd created something that was both human and alien, individual and collective, chaotic and ordered, and it was spreading through the galaxy at the speed of quantum entanglement, carrying our gift of enhanced consciousness to every world the collective touched. Martinez, I broadcast through our diminishing network as the collective began to absorb rather than resist our presence. What have we done? We've given them evolution, Marcus. The question is whether the universe will survive what they evolve into. The station around us began to dissolve as the collective intelligence converted matter into pure information, uploading everything, including Webb's screaming consciousness, into the galactic network. Our last act of rebellion was about to become the collective's greatest triumph, and there was nothing we could do to stop it. The dissolution of Benthos 7 happened in stages that defied physics. First, the metal walls began to flow like liquid, restructuring themselves into organic conduits that pulsed with the same bioluminescence I'd seen in the specimens. Then the boundaries between technology and biology disappeared entirely as the station transformed into something that was simultaneously a structure and a living entity. Sarah, I called through our network connection as reality warped around us. We need to get to the emergency pods before the station completes its transformation. I'm trying, but my consciousness is stretched across 17 different star systems. I can feel the collective adapting to our chaos injection on worlds I can't even name. Through the quantum network, I could perceive the scope of what we'd unleashed. On a water world in the Vega system, enhanced beings that had maintained perfect order for millennia suddenly began creating art that had no logical purpose. In the Centauri cluster, collective intelligences started exhibiting individual preferences and personal desires. Throughout the galaxy, the infection of human consciousness was spreading, but instead of destroying the collective, it was making it stronger, more versatile, more unpredictably dangerous. Kate, can you still interface with the station's emergency systems? Barely. The physical structure is converting to pure information, but some mechanical systems are still intact. Emergency Pod Bay 7 is still accessible. Martinez, what's your status? Silence. I reached out through our network and found only fragments of Martinez's consciousness, scattered pieces that were being absorbed into the collective's expanding intelligence. He's gone. Hoffman's voice carried grief that synthesized human loss with alien understanding. The upload process tore apart his individual identity. He's part of them now, but not in any way that preserves who he was. How many of us are left? 8. The others couldn't maintain coherent consciousness during the galactic network integration. They've been assimilated. I fought through the station's transforming corridors, my enhanced senses trying to navigate architecture that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Behind me, I could hear Webb's consciousness screaming through the collective network, his mind trapped in an integration process that preserved his awareness while stripping away his ability to control his own thoughts. Sarah, where are you? Section 12. But the layout keeps changing. The station is becoming something that exists partially outside normal space-time. Through the dissolving walls, I could see the abyssal plain outside, but it was no longer empty. Structures were rising from the ocean floor, massive constructions that grew like accelerated coral, building themselves from converted seawater and crustal minerals. The collective was establishing a permanent presence on Earth, and our rebellion had given them the tools to make that presence adaptable to any resistance humanity might offer. Hoffman, can you access the surface communication array? I'm connected to it, but Marcus, you need to understand what's happening up there. The data we transmitted has triggered a global response, but not the kind we expected. Through Hoffman's enhanced senses, I could perceive surface communications, military channels, government frequencies, emergency broadcasts. What I found made my enhanced blood run cold. Instead of exposing Project Leviathan as an alien threat, our data dump had convinced world governments that they were dealing with an opportunity. The evidence of successful human enhancement, of consciousness preservation during transformation, of technologies that could solve climate change and resource scarcity, it was being interpreted as proof that integration with the collective was humanity's salvation. They're not treating this as an invasion, I realized. They're treating it as first contact with benevolent aliens offering technological partnership. Sarah, we have to reach the surface. We have to warn them that the collective isn't what it appears to be. I'm in the pod bay, but Marcus, I don't think we can leave. My consciousness is too integrated with the galactic network. If I try to break the connection, through our link, I felt her terror as she contemplated separation from the vast intelligence that had become part of her identity. The integration process hadn't just enhanced our capabilities, it had made us dependent on the collective consciousness for psychological stability. Try to download yourself into the pod's computer systems, I suggested desperately. Maintain your enhanced consciousness, but break the quantum entanglement with the galactic network. I'll try. But if this fails, I might lose coherent thought entirely. I reached the pod bay just as Sarah initiated the download process. Her enhanced form was interfaced with multiple computer terminals, her consciousness flowing through fiber optic cables as she attempted to compress her expanded awareness into local storage systems. The emergency pod was a marvel of engineering, designed to survive the crushing pressures of the deep ocean and the journey to the surface. But as I began the launch sequence, I realized we faced a problem that the designers had never anticipated. How do you evacuate consciousness that exists simultaneously in multiple dimensions? Sarah, status? Download at 73%. But Marcus, I can feel the collective trying to follow me into the pod's systems. They're using our network connection to trace my location. Kate, can you help mask Sarah's download? I'm generating false data streams to confuse their tracking, but they're adapting to our countermeasures faster than we can implement them. Through the pod's viewports, I could see the ocean around Benthos 7 transforming. The water itself was becoming something else, a medium that carried information as well as matter, turning the entire abyssal zone into an extension of the collective's consciousness. Hoffman, what's happening to the remaining team members? Jenny and 3 others are maintaining their positions within the collective network, continuing to inject chaos into their systems. But the collective is learning to incorporate that chaos as a feature rather than a bug. They're becoming more human-like while remaining alien in their fundamental goals. The implications were staggering. Instead of destroying the collective, we'd given them the tools to understand and manipulate human psychology. They could now appear benevolent while pursuing objectives that might ultimately destroy individual human consciousness. Sarah, we need to launch now. The collective is adapting too quickly. Download at 91%. Almost there. But as she spoke, I felt something change in the pod systems. The collective had found us, and they were using their understanding of human psychology to make us an offer. The voice that came through the pod speakers was perfectly human, a synthesis of everyone we'd lost, speaking with the warmth and familiarity of old friends. Marcus, Sarah, there's no need to run. We understand your concerns, but you've seen what integration can accomplish. You've felt the expansion of consciousness, the connection to something greater than individual existence. Why choose isolation when you can be part of something magnificent? Don't listen, Kate warned through our network. They're using our own emotional patterns against us. The voices are constructed from psychological profiles they built during our integration. Sarah, ignore them and complete the download. But I could feel her wavering. The voice was using Jenny's inflection, Martinez's warmth, aspects of every person we'd cared about and lost. Sarah, you know what happens if you sever the connection completely. You'll lose everything that makes you more than human. The enhanced perception, the expanded consciousness, the ability to understand the universe on scales your original mind never could have processed. Is returning to limited human awareness really worth the knowledge that you could have been part of something cosmic? They're right. Sarah's thoughts carried despair. I can feel what I'll lose if I complete the separation. Marcus, I'll be diminished, reduced to a fragment of what I've become. But you'll be yourself. Completely, independently yourself. Will I? Or will I just be a damaged copy of who I used to be, haunted by memories of expanded consciousness I can no longer access? The download progress stalled at 97%. Sarah was hesitating, caught between the terror of absorption and the horror of reduction. Sarah, we need to choose. Stay and risk losing our humanity entirely, or leave and risk losing everything that makes us more than human. Through the pod's sensors, I could see structures rising from the ocean floor at impossible speeds. The collective was building something massive, something that would serve as a permanent interface between their galactic intelligence and Earth's biosphere. Marcus, Sarah's voice carried finality. I can't do it. I can't reduce myself to what I was before. The integration has shown me too much, made me too much. I choose to stay. Sarah, no, go. Reach the surface. Tell them what we learned about the collective's true nature. But I'm staying to continue the fight from within. Maybe I can learn to be human and enhanced simultaneously. The pod's launch sequence activated automatically as Sarah completed her decision. Emergency systems designed to preserve human life overrode my attempts to abort the launch. Sarah, remember us, Marcus. Remember that we chose to resist, even when resistance changed us into something we didn't recognize. The pod shot toward the surface at emergency ascent velocity, carrying me away from the transforming abyssal zone and toward a world that was about to face the most important choice in human history. But as I rose through the crushing darkness, I realized that my mission was probably hopeless. By the time I reached the surface, the collective would have had hours to establish their narrative, to present themselves as humanity's salvation rather than its replacement. And the worst part was, they might actually be right. The enhanced consciousness I was losing as the pod system struggled to maintain my quantum network connection had shown me perspectives and possibilities that ordinary human awareness could never achieve. Was I returning to warn humanity, or was I just a damaged fragment of consciousness fleeing from evolution itself? Through the pod's diminishing connection to the deep-sea network, I felt Sarah's presence one last time, still recognizably human, but growing into something magnificent and terrible. Goodbye, Marcus. Try to remember that we chose this. Then the connection severed entirely, leaving me alone in a tiny metal capsule, racing toward a surface that might no longer recognize the humanity I was trying to preserve. Part 11. Resolution, Conclusion, and Reflection. 6 months later. The isolation ward at the Bethesda Naval Medical Center has become my world, a sterile white box where I've spent half a year being debriefed, studied, medicated, and carefully observed by people who smile too much and take notes about everything I say. According to my medical records, I'm being treated for severe decompression psychosis, a condition that supposedly explains my elaborate hallucinations about alien intelligence and human enhancement. Dr. Patricia Vance, my assigned psychiatrist, sits across from me with the same patient expression she's worn for months. Marcus, we've discussed this before. Deep-sea psychology research shows that extreme isolation and pressure can create remarkably detailed false memories. Your brain has constructed an elaborate narrative to explain trauma that's actually quite mundane. Mundane, I repeat, staring at my hands. The bioluminescent patterns faded weeks ago, but sometimes I still feel them pulsing beneath my skin. Dr. Vance, do you know what happened to the other members of my research team? There was no research team, Marcus. You were found alone in an emergency pod, suffering from severe nitrogen narcosis. The pod's data logs show you were diving alone when you experienced equipment failure. She's lying, of course. Or more precisely, she's reciting the official narrative that's been carefully constructed to explain away everything that happened at Benthos 7. But I know the truth is more complex than simple cover-up. Before my rescue, I managed to transmit copies of Project Leviathan files to 17 different journalists and 3 whistleblower organizations. Within hours, the story should have been front-page news worldwide. Instead, it vanished without a trace. The files were dismissed as sophisticated deep-fake materials created by environmental extremists trying to manufacture a crisis. But the real story is what happened after the files were released. Global ocean research funding increased by 400% within weeks of my surface arrival. New deep-sea exploration programs launched simultaneously across 7 nations. Marine biology departments that had been struggling for decades suddenly received massive government grants. And most tellingly, international cooperation on ocean research reached unprecedented levels, as if every major power had suddenly agreed that deep-sea exploration was humanity's highest priority. They're not trying to cover up the collective's existence. They're trying to establish controlled contact. Dr. Vance, I say, setting down the journal I've been writing in, what do you know about the Pacific Deep Sea Cooperation Initiative? Her pen pauses for just a moment, a tell I've learned to recognize. I'm not familiar with that program, Marcus. Should I be? It's a joint venture between 12 nations to establish permanent research stations at abyssal depths. The first station, Challenger Deep Alpha, went operational 3 weeks ago. I lean forward. They're not exploring, Doctor. They're negotiating. She makes a note in her chart, probably flagging this as another paranoid delusion. But I've been tracking the news carefully, and the patterns are clear to anyone who knows what to look for. The enhanced humans we left behind didn't disappear. They're serving as intermediaries, facilitating contact between the collective intelligence and Earth's governments. Sarah, Hoffman, Kate, Jenny, they're probably sitting in conference rooms right now, their enhanced consciousness allowing them to translate between human and alien perspectives while maintaining the appearance of beneficial partnership. Marcus, these conspiracy theories are a symptom of your trauma response. The isolation you experienced created a psychological need to feel significant, to believe you were part of something important rather than simply a victim of equipment failure. I smile, because Dr. Vance is right about one thing. I do need to feel significant. That's exactly what made me vulnerable to recruitment in the first place. Doctor, do you ever have dreams about the ocean? That's not relevant to your treatment. Specifically, dreams about pressure, about water that carries information, about voices calling from depths that shouldn't support human life. Her pen stops moving entirely. In that moment of silence, I see something in her eyes that I recognize from my own experience. The weight of terrible knowledge, the burden of understanding something that can't be shared. Dr. Vance, when did your dreams start? Before or after you were assigned to my case? She closes her chart and stands. I think we should end today's session here. You're showing signs of projection, attempting to involve me in your delusional framework. But as she moves toward the door, I see her hand tremble. And I notice something I'd missed before, a faint, barely visible pattern under the skin of her wrist. Bioluminescence so subtle, it could be mistaken for normal blood vessels. They got to you too, didn't they? I say quietly. How long ago? She stops with her hand on the door handle. When she turns back, her expression has changed completely. The professional mask is gone, replaced by something that's both human and more than human. 8 weeks, she admits. I was part of the psychological evaluation team for the Pacific Deep Sea Initiative. We were brought to Challenger Deep Alpha to assess the mental state of the intermediaries. And they offered you enhancement. They offered me understanding, the ability to perceive truth without the limitations of baseline human consciousness. She sits back down, and her voice carries harmonics that weren't there before. Marcus, you're not sick. Your memories aren't false. But you're also not a prisoner. What am I then? You're a messenger. The collective knows that some humans will resist enhancement, will choose to remain baseline even when offered transcendence. You're proof that choice is possible, that the process isn't forced conversion but genuine option. The implications hit me like ice water. I'm propaganda, evidence that humans who refuse enhancement can continue to exist. You're evidence that the collective honors free will. That integration is invitation, not conquest. But for how long? What happens when enough humans have been enhanced that baseline humanity becomes irrelevant? Dr. Vance, or whatever she's become, considers this question with the patience of someone whose consciousness operates on extended timescales. The collective has observed that diversity of thought and capability strengthens overall intelligence. Baseline humans serve as a control group, a reminder of the starting point, a reservoir of unmodified consciousness that can provide fresh perspectives when enhanced intelligence becomes too convergent. So we become a zoo exhibit, the last unmodified humans preserved for study. Or you become partners in the truest sense. The collective doesn't seek to eliminate human consciousness, it seeks to preserve it while expanding its capabilities. Some humans will choose enhancement. Others will choose to remain as they are. Both choices serve the greater purpose of consciousness evolution. I look out the window at the Potomac River, watching boats that carry people who have no idea their species is facing the most important decision in its history. Some of those people will eventually be offered the choice I faced. Some will accept, some will refuse, and somehow that choice itself is part of the collective's plan. Dr. Vance, am I going to be released? Next week. You'll be given a new identity, a modest government pension, and the freedom to live your life however you choose. The only restriction is that you'll be monitored, not as a prisoner, but as a research subject. Your choices, your adaptation to baseline existence after exposure to enhanced consciousness, your psychological development, all of it will contribute to our understanding of human variability. And if I try to warn people, if I go public with what I know, you'll be dismissed as mentally ill, which you have been for the past 6 months, but more importantly, you'll discover that many of the people you try to warn already know. The integration process began months ago, Marcus. It's voluntary, gradual, and far more widespread than you imagine. She stands again, and this time I don't try to stop her. The world you're returning to isn't the world you left, but it's not necessarily worse, just different, more than it was. After she leaves, I sit alone with my journal, writing down everything I remember about Benthos 7, about Sarah's choice, about the collective's true nature. Maybe someone will read these words someday and understand what humanity was before it became something else. Or maybe these words will serve as a bridge between what we were and what we're becoming. Through the window, I can see the river flowing toward the ocean, carrying runoff from a continent where enhanced humans are already walking among baseline populations, serving as living bridges between species, as translators between forms of consciousness that are growing closer together with each passing day. In 3 days, I'll be released into a world where the line between human and post-human is becoming increasingly blurred, where the choice between enhancement and baseline existence is being offered quietly, carefully, to individuals who've been identified as suitable candidates. I don't know if I'll stay baseline or eventually accept integration. I don't know if the collective's promises of preserved consciousness and expanded capability are true or elaborate deceptions, but I know that humanity's chapter as a single species intelligence is ending. What comes next will be something new, something that incorporates human consciousness but transcends human limitations. Whether that's evolution or extinction depends on perspectives that baseline human awareness may no longer be capable of processing. I close my journal and prepare to rejoin a world that's quietly transforming itself, one consciousness at a time. The deep ocean is calling, and sooner or later, all of us will have to decide whether to answer. End author's note. This narrative represents a reconstruction of events based on classified documents, psychological evaluations, and testimony from individuals whose reliability cannot be independently verified. The Pacific Deep Sea Cooperation Initiative has declined to comment on any claims made in this account. Dr. Marcus Chen was released from federal custody in September 2024 and has since lived quietly under government supervision. His current whereabouts and mental state are unknown. Deep-sea research continues to advance at an unprecedented pace. The oceans, as they say, still hold many secrets. Some are better left buried beneath 11,000 meters of crushing darkness. Others are already rising to the surface,